unlike the other speakers, I have not prepared anything because I wanted to react to what has been said. And I want to perhaps explain my specific angle with regard to Gómez Dávila. Unfortunately, unlike Martin Mosebach, I never met him. I only met his daughter, Emilia Rosa, when I taught at the Javeriana in Bogota in 2002. And I drove around his house with a library that at that time was not yet sold. I was very much helped by my Jesuit friends at the Javeriana in this context. And I'm very glad to see one of my young colleagues from that time, Juan Mejia, among us, who also helped me in writing the introduction to my book. I also want to greet Olivier Poudrou, with whom I have corresponded extensively on Gómez Dávila. I want to focus on 2 points. On the one hand, I see that how should I say, an archival interest in Gómez Dávila is blooming. And that's fine, we need that. And therefore, it is also important to try to get hands on what is still left. For example, it was mentioned that he was not a great writer of letters, but even if epistolography was not his genre, it would be interesting to try to collect the letters that he must have written in a long life. I don't know whether this is still possible or it's too late. Unfortunately, Rosa Emilia died at the end of last year, so she cannot help me. There are no longer children, but we have moved to the next generation. And also, when I visited Rosa Emilia in 2002, she showed me a manuscript that he had written during the Second World War in French. She did not allow me to make a copy of it, and I would like what became out of this manuscript. So I think it would be quite interesting to try, before it's too late, to contact the grandchildren who may have inherited some of this material, to try to preserve it before it is lost in all winds. That is the first thing. The second thing is, I completely agree with what was just said, that Gómez Dávila is far more ambiguous than seems at first glance. He, in fact, knew his impossible offers, I think, much better than the church fathers and the scholastic thinkers. That may be a provocation, but I have no doubt about that. He preferred to read Freud and Sartre to reading Aquinas. My historical location of him is that, in fact, he belongs to the late modernist branch that discovers Catholicism as an alternative to illnesses of modernity, but ultimately does not have a specific interest in a philosophical foundation. Forgive me, Professor Kinzel, if I strongly reject as a philosopher the plausibility of the claim either Hegel or Schopenhauer. Hegel claimed famously that we move towards progress. Schopenhauer claimed that we live in the worst possible of all worlds. Well, there is a lot of position between them. It reminds me a little bit of what my colleague at Notre Dame once said. Ultimately, in ethics, there's the choice between Aristotle and Nietzsche. Well, if you put it that way, you have to choose Aristotle, but I'm not 100% sure that there's a logic necessity in this claim that we have to choose one of the other. So I'm very skeptical when I'm confronted with Gómez Dávila, is that, in fact, Gómez Dávila is a brilliant aphorist. He has a great phenomenology of the illnesses of present, but he's not a sharp metaphysical thinker. It was also not his fault not to expect too much from him, because if he then is offered as an alternative to a lot of what is going on today, I become very cautious. And I want to end, since we are already beyond the original time, with 2 remarks which I think are important. The one is not only that Gómez Dávila knew the countercurrents quite well, from which he distanced himself, as Professor Molina just said. It is so that one area of philosophy which I think think he is relatively familiar with is the phenomenological tradition. And that could explain, I don't know whether this is the real explanation, why Dietrich von Engelhardt, who had studied with Max Scheler, was interested in meeting him. Because no doubt the ethical framework that is in the background of Gómez Dávila is value ethics inspired by Max Scheler. And this is an important aspect. The other thing that is relevant is that his philosophical anthropology, which indeed recognizes, for example, the evolution of the human mind out of the animal realm as an undeniable fact, is influenced by a lot of what was going on in German philosophical anthropology in the 1920s, that rooted humans in the biotic evolution, while at the same time insisting on the specific differences. And in my little book, which was fundamentally, if I may say a few words about that, when I was in 2002 in Bogota, I had heard about Gómez Dávila before, but I never read anything by him besides the reviews that had been published in Germany. So I bought the selection of the Escolios, and since in Bogota you have difficulties to breathe when you're not accustomed to this altitude, I could hardly sleep, and so I took the book. And on the one hand, I was fascinated. On the one hand, I was also repulsed. And so I began to write immediately counter-aphorisms to it. And I did it over the years when I was asked to contribute to Festschriften. And when I collected them, the publisher asked me to write a longer introduction. I said, sure. And what I do think is perhaps useful in that introduction is the analysis, first of the textos, because the textos are his most ambitious work. I think from a literary point of view, it is weakest text. And when you try to make it consistent, you don't get very far. You see that he's not a trained philosopher, but still, I think it is likely that the title Escolios un texto implicito refer to the textos, or at least the central parts of the textos, and therefore every student of Gómez Dávila has to read them in order to see what are the categories that direct him and will bring forth this brilliant aphorisms. And the other claim that I make in this introduction is that in my eyes his best works are not the Escolios but the Notas. The reason is that in the Escolios, the desire of distancing himself from the present became too dominant. There are too many polemic aphorisms, while the Notas are much richer in the variety of phenomena that he tries to analyze. And my personal opinion is that even if you fight against vulgarity, the risk of infection is very high. And that therefore, that's not the best way to deal with a certain phenomena. So these are my 2 cents of worth.